Dramatic versus natural effect. We're gonna come full circle. We talked about this far earlier in the workshop, but now that you've seen so much, I feel like it's important that we jump back to this topic and show you these images again, show you different setups, and talk about this one more time, because now that you know what you know at this point in the workshop, it's gonna make so much more sense. Let's start first with the primary tips, and then we're gonna work through each individual shot. Now, number one, dramatic is essentially the formula. The for dramatic is equal to the key light, your primary light that you're lighting your subject with, as being kind of the dominant light source. It's greater than the ambient light, okay? That's gonna give you a dramatic look. Natural looks generally comes when the key light is kind of less powerful. It takes a back seat to that ambient effect. And refining or corrective type adjustments is generally when you're simply adding key light. You're adding additional light to the ambient effect. So we say key light plus ambient light. That's where we go for that refinement, that corrective kind of look. All right, lastly, I want to say that I want you always start with what you want the scene to look like as far as the background goes, as far as everything goes in the shot, with the exception of maybe the subject or whatever's in shadow. And then add light as you see fit, okay? So always start from that basic. Don't try and just add light and try and create something that just off your first shot. It's not gonna happen. I have a lot of experience doing this, and still I always start with what I want the background to like. Okay, what I want my main light now to look like. Okay, what do I need as far as fills now? What do I need as far as additional lights? You always start simple and build on top of it. Start with one light, then go to two, and then to three, and so forth. So, I feel like this is a very somber video. Why am I so somber? You always do this. No, it's exciting, people. Let's have fun with it. Okay, let's talk through each of these different shots, because each of them are gonna require kind of a slightly different set of gear. And what I wanna do first is, before we even get to these top shots, these are kind of individual case studies that I wanna talk through of how we lit and how we kind of approached each one of these scenes. But let's talk about this bottom set of images right here, because this is that whole point that I'm trying to get across of dramatic versus natural, and about using your shutter speed to control the amount of fill that's being added to the scene. So what we have on the left side right here, let's look at the camera settings. The bottom left, we're at, on a 50mm lens, this is the Canon 50mm f1.2L. So we're at 1/200 of a second, we're at f1.2 and ISO 50, okay? So again, I always choose my aperture based on the compositional effect that I want to have, and for this I want an incredibly shallow depth of field and just crushed bokeh, and I want this tree to kind of create this nice V that kind of leads into her. This is after the sun has set, actually, so we're in a pretty dark kind of environment right now, so I don't really need an ND filter, and that's why I'm dropping to ISO 50, because that was enough to get me down to get this look here. From there, all we're doing is, let's see, it's dusk, we have a white over silver, and we're bouncing at around 1/4 to 1/8 power. Now, the point I'm trying to illustrate is that this look is gonna change dramatically simply based on the amount of fill light that we allow in. If I were to use an ND filter, and let's say I were to cut the amount of ambient light down even further and feature more flash, it'd have an even more dramatic effect. But look what we do. I leave everything. Everything stays identical through all three of these shots, with the exception of the shutter speed, okay? So from here, we drop to 1/100 of a second, and the third shot, this shot, we go to 1/50 of a second. So this is one stop brighter than this shot in its ambient light in the shutter speed. This is 2 stops brighter than this shot. The flash exposure stayed identical throughout all these shots. What do we end up getting? Well, here we have a more dramatic image because we see more of the blue tones. We see more of like kind of all the tones in the background. The shadows end up being darker, so everything is more dramatic because we're pulling the background down further. Here, it brightens up a little bit. Look at the little shadows over here on the left side of her dress. See how it opens up? It opens up a little bit because we added one stop of shadow fill by simply slowing down the shutter, by letting more ambient light in. So the tree is no longer as dark. The background, we don't have as much blue in the back. We go up another stop. Now the sky is almost blown out everywhere. We have a lot more detail in the shadows in the tree. We have almost completely filled the shadow underneath the chin on the left side of her body. This is exactly what I'm talking about as far as ambient versus flash balancing, and it's exactly what I'm talking about when I'm talking about refinement. These small adjustments, these small decisions are going to make massive impacts on the type of image that you want to come up with. There's no right or wrong. Between the three of these shots, you can't say that any of them are right or wrong. They simply have a different look. If you want more natural, you allow more ambient light to come in. If you want more dramatic, you allow less ambient light to come in. One other interesting note that I wanted to add here is we added fill light to her basically by just allowing more ambient light in. Only do that when your fill light matches the color temperature of your flash, okay? We're out in daylight right now. I'm using daylight balance flash. We're getting roughly daylight. I'm okay to balance those two things. But if you're allowing yellow ambient light to balance over blue flash, then you're getting mixed lighting, okay? And that's not gonna look good. It's gonna compromise the overall image quality. The other thing I want to mention is one thing you need to keep in mind is that the flash power, the brightness of her skin on this right side, okay? On the left side, the brightness of her skin in the shadow area is simply the ambient exposure, meaning that not a lot of the flash is actually covering the side of the dress. So the brightness on the left side of her body is primarily due to ambient light. So when we slow down the shutter, the brightness of that dress area, it brightens significantly because we're allowing more light over that area. But the brightness of areas where flash is touching, the right side of her face, the right side of her body, that brightness is determined by ambient light plus flash. So as you slow down the shutter, notice that we're also adding a little bit of brightness to the face and to that right side of the body, okay? It's just one thing to keep in mind. It's not that your flash is getting any more powerful. The flash isn't. We already know that. We know that when the flash fires, it fires so quickly that it doesn't matter how long the shutter is actually open. The only difference in that brightness is from ambient exposure. Now that we know that, let's go ahead and take a look at each of these images on top. For this first shot, we talked about this a little bit earlier. I want to briefly talk through it again and kind of talk through the overall thought process in this. I love that the sun was directly above this tree and kind of just giving a backlight into our entire set. I wanted this to look like we had a multiple light setup, even though we only have one on-camera flash. So I put her back to it. That way the sun is acting like a backlight on the entire scene. It's giving her a rim light, a hair light. It's giving the grass a little backlight. It's giving the tree a little bit of a backlight. I like natural light effects, but I also love the fact that we're getting the sunlight coming through this dress and it kind of highlights her form a little bit. So what do I want to do? I want to expose so that we can see that sunlight coming through, so that we can see some of the detail in the color in the sky, and so that the dress isn't simply blown out. Had I exposed for just her skin tones, the dress would be blown out everywhere. It'd be blown out almost in every single spot, even over the front of her would be blown for the most part. So I set the ambient exposure. We're on a 24mm prime f1.4L2, the Canon version. We're at 1/200 of a second, f1.4, ISO 100. We're using a 5-stop neutral density filter, okay? The same Stingray 5-stop filter. We're bouncing with a silver because it's kind of a little bit off to the side a little bit. We need to overpower the sun. We need as much light as we can get, so we're using just a straight silver. I'm bouncing at 1/1, and I'm not using any grids or anything like that because I'm basically looking at the light. I'm at 105 zoom, and I take a shot just looking at the reflector just to make sure that I fill the entire reflector with light. I want to make sure that I fill the entire reflector and not just a small part of the reflector. If just a small part of the reflector catches light, it's a small modifier. If the entire reflector fills up with light without letting too much light spill around the outside, then we're maximizing the amount of size of that reflector. So we're going to get a softer, larger light source, and we're using up more of it. So we're basically going to get a stronger light source as well because we're not allowing it to spill over the edge. So use your zoom to control that. And depending on where that modifier is placed, you're going to have to zoom in and out to make sure all of your flash, all of that light is right on the reflector and it's not spilling over the edge, nor is it too tight and hitting just a small part of the reflector. When that light comes back, we get a beautiful looking kind of directional light coming onto her. What is that directional light kind of lighting like? It's basically loop lighting, okay? It's coming directionally. It's not so directional that it's Rembrandt, but it's a little bit directional. Always when you're lighting, you're gonna find this trick out. Always when you're lighting, light top down. The light should always be coming from at least slightly above your subject, okay? So the light right here is being held just a little bit above the head, so that way it's coming down a little bit. Light will always look more natural when it's coming down on a subject versus when it's going up. If it's going up, it looks unnatural and it creates something off about the image. It just doesn't look quite right. When we're going for something natural, we always light top down. If you're going for that scary ghost effect, yeah, sure, light bottom up. That usage of light does have a purpose. It's just not for this type of a look. So that's how we got to this shot. Let's talk about this shot of Yvette in the desert now. We're in the desert. Our light is setting extremely quickly, and I notice that we have this beautiful lines going back on the sand. And I'd say, Yvette, I need you to go sit down in front of that very quickly. In this situation, it's kind of funny because we had off-camera lights with us, and this was we're shooting for Lighting 101 and Lighting 201. But I didn't even have the off-camera light set up ready to go yet. So I just said, look, grab a silver reflector, grab whatever you got, and just come over, run over. I need my assistant to stand right next to me. I had no intention of shooting this with just a reflector. It's just that's the tool that was ready and available before the sunset. We had literally 5 minutes before this entire area was covered in shadows. And it would have taken me 10, 15 minutes to set up the lighting. So in that situation, these techniques that I'm talking about, these bounce techniques, you might think, well, Pi, if you had off-camera lights, why would you ever do, this type of stuff? Because sometimes you're in a pinch and you're in a bind and you need to get the shot just to get the shot. And for that situation, I'm using these techniques that I know I can go to and they're quick and easy to do. And we're shooting at 1/100th of a second, f2 and ISO 100. We have the 5-stop neutral density filter, and I think I'm just, at this point, like I didn't even bother doing a step-down ring. I'm holding the filter just over the lens, okay? We're using a silver reflector, and I'm bouncing very closely. So I'm pretty dang close to Yvette right now, and I'm simply bouncing right off to the left of this reflector right there. Again, I have the reflector held up a little bit higher so that way it's coming top down. So look, the shadows are traveling down and to the right. It looks more natural that way. But look at the background. Once again, we're going for dramatic effect. We've underexposed the background, and then we brighten up the subject. Dramatic effect, okay? All of these examples are dramatic effect. All right, I always take my first shot. My first shot is just without flash to get my exposure. I got my exposure down. The second shot is with flash. Here's a rule of thumb. If you're outdoors, you're in bright sunlight, you are using an ND filter, a 5-stop filter, you want to get as much light as possible. In general, you're going to be shooting at 1/1 power on your flash, in general. Okay, if you're ever trying to overpower the sun with just one of these on-camera flash modifiers, or just one of these on-camera flashes, in general, you're always going to be at 1/1, okay? Sometimes it's 1/2 power, but typically it's 1/1, so that's a good starting point, just a good rule of thumb to use. If you're trying to overpower the sun, just start at 1/1. All right, we wait for a little bit of wind to kick in, we get this beautiful shot, and that's what we got there. All right, going on to the third shot, top right. This is the 2470 Mark II, same lens I have on right now. We're at approximately 39 millimeters, 1/200th of a second, f2.8 and ISO 200. Once again, I approach the scene, I decide on my aperture based on my composition. I get my shutter speed and my ISO based on essentially sync speed and overall image quality. What I do first, decide what I want the background to look like. I wanted the background to be a little bit brighter. I wanted to show this little highlight in the ocean behind her. But I want it to still be dramatic enough where against these dark rocks, you can see the backlight kissing the dark rocks, but you can't really see the detail in the shadow. I want her to be the detail in the shadow in the shot. I have her lean back and arch over the rock, bring her hand up to the hair, and I'm kind of adjusting things as I go just to kind of get it right. I let that other hand relax, and I can't see it here, but I think it's going kind of relaxing, going over the tummy. Can you guess how we lit it? So here we did loop. This is basically loop. Somewhat close to Rembrandt. This is for sure loop. Here, overhead. I have a reflector being held just above her body, and I'm shooting kind of at her same angle, and I'm just bouncing up into this reflector that's directly above her and coming down right on her. Okay, so we get this beautiful top-down light that really accentuates her and her features. There's one thing I want to show you too. I actually added a fill at the bottom of this just to show you what it would look like. I just want to show you her arm basically, with the fill and without the fill. In many situations, a fill is not going to do what you want it to do. The reason why is for this shot, we want shadows. You actually notice that we're actually lighting this shot short lit, right? All of these shots, this is symmetrical. This one is broad lit, but guess what? She has a pretty narrow face and we're shooting pretty far away, so that's totally fine. This shot is short lit and she has a slightly wider face, but I want it to look a little bit more narrow. So we're short lighting, the broad side of the face falls in the shadows. Fantastic. The arm falls into the shadows. Fantastic. If I don't let the arm fall into the shadows, if I add a fill to that, it actually makes the arm look so much larger than it actually is, okay? So remember that shadows are a good thing. They conceal and flatter in a lot of situations. You don't want to always open up the shadows. Use the shadows to your benefit. They will make your subject look more flattering in camera when you're using it to kind of narrow and slim and to do those types of things. Allow to do that. Don't always fill the shadows. So that's how we got to this shot. Again, what was the flash power setting? Again, we have, I think this one was either a 3 or a 5-stop neutral density filter. I wrote 3 there. I might have been using the 3-stop. I have a Stingray 3-stop too if it wasn't, super dark. But again, this is silver overhead because we need a lot of power. And I could tell you off the top of my head that if we're using silver overhead and we want it to be roughly the same brightness as the background, we're going to need to be around 1/1 or 1/2 power. So I think that's what I have here too. It's about 1/2 power to 1/1 power. Just in general, whenever you're bouncing and you want to get overpowering type effects, you need to be at full power, okay? That's just a rule of thumb. Granted, the light is quite close to her, so if we got it just right where we fill up that reflect with light, we hit it perfectly, we could probably be around 1/2 to 1/4. But just a good rule of thumb to remember, overpowering the sun, 1/1. And it rhymes. I love it when my rules rhyme. Overpower the sun, 1/1. Sweetness. So the whole point of this video is I want you guys to really understand the refinement, because these small decisions that you guys make in terms of ambient exposure versus flash exposure will completely control the type of image that you get. So take a shot, look at the light, look at the way the shadows are falling, slow things down. I always tell all of our staff, slow it down. You don't need to shoot at a blazing speed of light and get 500 shots that are just average. Get 50 shots that are fantastic. That I would much rather have 50 fantastic shots than 500 average ones. Slow it down, look at your light, analyze, and then modify and refine. That's it for this video. Let's head on to the next one now.